All right, get ready to dive deep with us today, folks. We're going into prophecy.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, we're going to be looking specifically at it through a philosopher's lens this time.
Oh, that's a great approach.
Yeah, so we're going to be using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on prophecy for this one.
That's a solid source.
And we're going to be kind of focusing on the conflict between, the idea of prophecy and a contingent future.
Right, because it seems like if prophecy is real, then the future can't be contingent.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And, as philosophers, we're really interested in free will.
Absolutely. I mean, how can we have free will if the future's already set?
Exactly. So that's what we're going to try to figure out.
I love it.
So I guess to get started, just to recap for everyone listening, prophecy, it's not always about predicting the future.
Right. I mean, in a lot of religions, it's more about communicating God's will, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
about revealing something about God. But for this deep dive, we're really going to zero in on prophecies that do seem to foretell those contingent events.
The ones that make you wonder, how could they have known that?
Exactly. And when we say contingent, what we mean is an event that could have or could not have happened.
Right. It's not like the sun rising. It's something that genuinely could have gone either way.
Yeah. So one example is Peter's denial of Jesus, which is a very famous one.
Yeah. Classic example.
So if the prophecy about Peter's denial comes from a perfect, all-knowing God, doesn't that mean it has to come true?
It would seem so, right? I mean, if God knows it's going to happen, how can it not?
Right. And does that turn us all into puppets, basically?
That's the question. If we're just playing out a script that's already written.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big challenge for those of us who believe in free will.
Absolutely.
So how do we untangle this whole thing?
Well, there are a few different ways philosophers have tried to grapple with this.
Lay 'em on me.
One way is to just say, well, there is no free will.
Just sidestep the whole issue.
Exactly. Everything's predetermined. So the future set, prophecy or no prophecy.
So if everything is predetermined, it doesn't really matter if there's prophecy or not.
Right. It's all going to happen the way it's going to happen.
But for the sake of this deep dive, let's assume that free will is on the table.
Right. I mean, it's kind of a big deal for us philosophers.
Exactly. We're going to need that.
Yeah.
So if we're not going with the predetermined route, then another option is to kind of think about God's knowledge of the future.
Right. What if God doesn't actually know the future in the way we traditionally imagine?
Okay, now we're getting interesting.
Yeah, this is where we get into open theism.
Open theism, where the future is open even to God.
Exactly. God might have purposes and hopes, but the future's not set in stone.
I see. So it's not like God has a crystal ball showing exactly what's going to happen.
Right. It's more like God's working with us, responding to our choices.
Okay, that's an interesting thought.
So if that's the case, how does prophecy even work?
Right, if God doesn't know exactly what's going to happen, how can he reveal future events?
Right, that's a great question. And William Hasker, a proponent of open theism, offers a few possible explanations.
Okay, let's hear it.
He suggests that maybe prophecy isn't always about literal prediction,
Okay, so it's not necessarily a news report from the future.
Right, maybe it's more about communicating God's will and desires.
So like God saying, hey, this is what I'd like to see happen, but ultimately it's up to you humans.
Yeah, exactly. Like with Peter's denial, maybe God saw the potential for it,
Yeah.
but it wasn't a guaranteed outcome.
Right, like God was giving Peter a warning or a heads up.
Yeah, something to think about,
Okay, so that's one way to look at it. But what about those prophecies that do seem to predict specific events?
Well, Hasker also suggests that God, being God, can perceive trends and tendencies that we might miss.
So it's like a divine form of pattern recognition.
Exactly. He sees Peter's personality, his flaws, the pressure he'll face.
And from that, God can make an educated guess about what Peter might do.
Right. It's not about seeing a crystal clear future, but about understanding human nature really well.
Okay, so God's not omniscient in the sense of knowing every single detail, but he's a master of probability.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it.
So that's two possible explanations, and Hasker has one more for us, right?
He does. He points out that some prophecies might be about things God has already decided to do.
Okay, so in those cases, God knows the outcome because he's the one making it happen.
Exactly. It's like if I decide to bake a cake, I know there's going to be cake later.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But, even with these explanations, there are still some challenges.
Oh, I'm sure there are. This is philosophy after all.
Right. Like, seeing trends and predicting human behavior is one thing, but what about those really specific, out-of-the-blue prophecies?
Yeah, like Judas betraying Jesus. That seems like such a random event. You couldn't predict that just from observing trends.
You're right, and that's a key criticism that Thomas Flint raises.
Another philosopher coming in with a counter-argument.
Exactly. He argues that if God's working off trends, as Hesker suggests, those super-specific events would throw a wrench in the whole system.
Right, because they don't fit the pattern.
Exactly. So how can God be certain about those wild card events?
It feels like we're already in some pretty deep water here.
Yeah, and it seems like this whole prophecy problem is tied to a bigger issue.
Which is?
How can God have any knowledge of the future if we genuinely have free will?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is. And it's one that's plagued philosophers for centuries.
So I guess to unravel this further, we need to look at how philosophers have tried to explain God's knowledge of the future more broadly.
Exactly, not just in the context of prophecy.
And I hear there are some really interesting concepts we can explore.
Oh, there are. We've got Ochimism, a temporal eternity, and middle knowledge.
All right, those sound pretty intense. I'm ready to take the plunge.
Let's do it. Let's dive into Ochimism first.
Oh yeah, Ochimism. That's a fascinating one.
It really makes you think about time and truth in a whole new way.
Yeah, I remember learning about this in my philosophy classes. It's the one where prophecies are true when they're spoken, but what they're about could still be false.
Right, it's like a prophecy exists in this weird limbo, true and potentially false at the same time.
It's a mind bender for sure.
So William of Ockham, the philosopher behind this idea, he said the truth of a prophecy actually depends on what happens in the future.
So even though Jesus said Peter would deny him, Peter could still have chosen differently.
Right, exactly.
But wait, if Peter had chosen not to deny Jesus, wouldn't that mean Jesus' prophecy was false?
That's where things get really interesting.
Does that mean Peter has power over the past or something? Can he change what Jesus said just by making a different choice?
Now you're getting into the heart of Ockhamism, this idea of counterfactual power over the past.
If Peter's choice can somehow affect the truth of something that already happened, what does that even mean for the nature of time? Like, is the past really fixed and unchangeable?
Or can our present actions ripple backward and change things that have already happened?
This is getting into some serious time travel territory.
It is, and it clashes with some other philosophical ideas like presentism, which says that only the present moment really exists.
So if only now is real, how can something I do in the future affect something that happened in the past?
It's a tough one to wrap your head around.
And I think you mentioned there are some counter-arguments to Ockhamism as well.
Yeah, some people criticize it for making prophecy seem kind of deceptive.
Like, if a prophecy can be true, even if the event doesn't happen, what's the point of prophecy at all? What are we even talking about when we say something is true in that case?
Right, it's like saying, I predict you'll win the lottery, and then even if you don't, I can still say, well, my prediction was true based on the possibility that you could have won.
Yeah, that feels like a cop-out.
It does, right? So Ockhamism offers an interesting solution, but it comes with its own set of problems.
Okay, so maybe Ockhamism isn't the perfect answer. What about this a temporal eternity idea?
Ah, yes, a temporal eternity. This one's a classic.
That one always seemed really mind-blowing to me.
It is. It's this idea that God exists outside of time altogether.
So from God's perspective, past, present, and future, they're all just now.
Exactly. There's no linear progression for God. It's all just one big eternal moment.
So for God, there's no difference between something that happened 1,000 years ago and something that's going to happen 1,000 years from now.
Right. It's all eternally present to him.
So from that perspective, prophecy is just God describing what he already sees, not predicting something that's going to happen.
It's like looking at a map, you see the whole landscape laid out in front of you.
And that seems to solve the free will problem, right? If God is outside of time, the whole issue of prophecies influencing our choices becomes irrelevant.
It does seem that way, but there's a catch.
There's always a catch.
As soon as a prophet actually speaks the prophecy, it enters into time, right?
I see what you mean. It becomes a specific event in our timeline.
Exactly. So are we back to the original problem, where something that happened in the past seems to be determining the future?
It's like God's timeless knowledge gets injected into time and messes everything up.
But proponents of this view, like Stump and Kretzmann, they argue that most prophecies are actually pretty vague.
So there's room for interpretation. There are different ways they could be fulfilled.
Exactly. They give a general direction, but they don't spell out every detail, which leaves space for free will.
Okay, I can see that. But what about those super detailed, specific prophecies? The ones that seem to pinpoint a single event with incredible accuracy.
Stump and Kretzmann, they say that those prophecies might make the event inevitable, but that doesn't mean there's no free will involved.
Wait, how does that work?
They make a distinction between free will and free action.
Okay, I'm listening.
So you can choose something freely, even if circumstances, like a prophecy, make it impossible to actually do it.
So, like, I might freely choose to eat a piece of cake, but if someone already ate the whole cake, I can't actually do it.
Exactly. Free will is about the choice itself, the intention, while free action is about actually carrying it out.
That's a subtle distinction, but I can see how it might apply here. But I'm still struggling with this idea that a prophecy can make something inevitable without messing with free will.
It's definitely a tricky concept.
Mhm.
And that brings us to our final solution, middle knowledge, which was developed by Luis de Molina.
Okay, middle knowledge. This is the one where God has this massive database of what-if scenarios, right?
You got it. He knows every possible choice anyone could make in any situation.
It's like God has this giant flowchart of all possible futures branching out in every direction.
But before we get into the details of middle knowledge, let's take a step back and think about why God would even need to know the future in the first place.
That's a good point. It's not like God needs to know what's going to happen in the Super Bowl or who's going to win the lottery.
Right, so what's the purpose of divine foreknowledge?
If God already knows what's going to happen, isn't it too late to change anything?
Exactly. It seems like foreknowledge and divine intervention wouldn't really work together.
Like, if God knows I'm going to make a bad choice, what's the point of warning me about it? My choice is already made.
And that's where Molina comes in. He says what God really needs is not just knowledge of what will happen, but knowledge of what could happen and what would happen in different situations.
So not just the one fixed future, but all the potential futures that could unfold.
Exactly. And that's where middle knowledge comes in.
Okay, I'm ready for this. Tell me all about middle knowledge.
So Molina divides God's knowledge into three categories.
3.
First, there's natural knowledge, which is all the necessary truths, the things that just have to be true, like the laws of logic.
So the unchangeable foundation of reality.
Right. Then you have free knowledge, which is everything God freely chooses to do, like creating the universe and humanity.
So it's like God's creative decisions, the things he brought into being because he wanted to.
Exactly. And then in between those two, you have middle knowledge.
A middle ground.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting. Middle knowledge is all about the choices made by free beings.
So the stuff that's not up to God.
It's the knowledge of all the choices anyone would make in any given situation.
So it's like God has this massive library of if this, then that statements for every person who ever lived or will ever live.
That's a great way to visualize it.
And this middle knowledge allows God to create the world knowing exactly how we're going to react to things.
Exactly. He knows how free beings will respond in different circumstances, and he can plan accordingly.
So with middle knowledge, God's not just predicting the future, he's actually shaping it.
In a way, yes. He's setting the stage, knowing how the actors will play their parts.
It's like he's rolling a play, but he's also directing it and knows how all the actors will improvise their lines.
That's a great analogy. But even middle knowledge, with its seemingly perfect solution, has faced some criticism.
I figure there had to be some objections. What are they?
Well, one of the biggest questions is, are these what-if choices even really true or false if they never actually happen?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Like, if someone would steal money in a certain situation, but that situation never comes up, can we really say they're a thief? It gets into some tricky territory about, like, potentiality versus actuality.
Exactly. Can we actually make definitive statements about choices that never get made? It's kind of like asking someone, if I offered you $1 million to shave your head, would you do it? Even if they say no, can we be absolutely sure?
Right, we're dealing with hypothetical situations here, not actual events.
And that raises the question of whether even God can know these counterfactuals for certain.
Yeah, I mean, free will implies that there's at least some element of unpredictability, right?
Yeah.
Maybe even God can't fully know what someone would do in a situation they've never actually been in.
That's a core argument against middle knowledge, yeah. Some philosophers say that even with divine omniscience, there might be limits to what can be known about hypothetical choices.
It's like free will introduces a kind of fuzziness into the picture, even for God.
A certain amount of uncertainty that can't be fully resolved.
So it seems like even middle knowledge, as elegant as it is, doesn't give us a complete solution to the puzzle of prophecy.
It doesn't, and that's part of what makes philosophy so fascinating, right? It pushes us to wrestle with these really tough questions, the ones that might not have neat and tidy answers.
It forces us to confront the limits of what we can know.
And maybe even the limits of what can be known.
So prophecy, turns out, It's not just about predicting the future.
It's a gateway to some much deeper questions.
Questions about free will, the nature of time, the nature of knowledge.
It's a microcosm of some of the biggest debates in philosophy.
And those debates are still going strong today.
Philosophers are still arguing about these issues, refining their arguments, coming up with new ways of looking at things.
So no easy answers, just more and more questions to ponder.
That's the beauty of it, I think. The journey is just as important as the destination.
Well said. So after this whirlwind tour of prophecy, what's the main takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is that prophecy isn't just a theological curiosity. It's a window into some of the most fundamental questions about what it means to be human.
About what it means to exist in time, to make choices, to grapple with the mysteries of knowledge and free will.
Exactly, it's about the very nature of reality.
And as we've seen, there's no single answer, no one right way to understand it.
Each of the approaches we've discussed, they all offer a different piece of the puzzle. They all have their strengths and weaknesses.
It's kind of like prophecy itself, a little bit mysterious, open to interpretation.
And ultimately leading to more questions than answers.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into prophecy.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep those philosophical wheels turning, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.